Mark strutted into the office that morning like he'd invented gravity, wearing a blazer that screamed midlife crisis, and shoes that looked like they were smuggled out of a magician's starter kit. He passed my cubicle without a glance, too busy barking at some poor intern about synergy and next-gen bandwidth modeling, which is corporate for, I don't know what I'm doing, but I want it in PowerPoint by noon. I sipped my burnt coffee and watched the circus unfold, same as I had for the last 15 years. Quiet, invisible, and apparently just the lady in compliance to half the company. Let me paint you a picture. While Mark was throwing glitter at whiteboards and parading consultants like they were boy band reunion specials, I was the one making sure we didn't violate ITAR, misclassify procurement codes, or accidentally bid on contracts that would land us on a federal watch list. You know, tiny details like that. I didn't need applause. I needed working printers and a chair that didn't squeak like a dying rodent. My name wasn't on the walls, but it was etched into every clause of our most profitable government contracts. I wasn't loud. I was precise. That's probably why Mark hated me. Oh, and hey, before I forget, if you're listening and haven't hit the subscribe button or dropped a like, go ahead and do that now. 90% of y'all tune in and never hit it, and honestly, it's the one thing that tells us we're not just shouting into the void. Plus, it mildly irritates my former boss, and that's a beautiful bonus. So yeah, thanks. Back to Mark. He'd been circling for months, cutting me out of project meetings, reassigning interns to assist with things I never asked for, and suddenly forgetting to loop me in on new compliance updates. Updates that I, ironically, authored. My name was mysteriously absent from documents I'd reviewed. He started referring to BidSync Alpha, the algorithm I literally built, as his personal innovation. I didn't argue. I just watched. Watched and archived. Every access log, every forwarded email, every last edit made in our internal policy matrix got downloaded, timestamped, and saved. I didn't fight for credit. I built a map. BidSync Alpha wasn't just a shiny toy for Mark to demo at conferences. It was our golden goose. The system that analyzed federal bid requests and generated optimized, legally compliant proposals in record time. We didn't just save time, we won contracts that other firms didn't even qualify for. But here's the catch. The entire certification hinged on one clause. Clause 12.9, buried in a sea of digital policy frameworks that most execs skimmed past like it was the terms and conditions on a new iPhone. Guess who wrote that clause? Guess who held the only credential on file that could activate it? And guess who knew that removing her from the system without a formal override would render every single federal bid we submitted non-compliant? Mark didn't ask. He assumed. That's what guys like him do. They confuse charisma with competence, volume with vision. He thought the future of the firm rested on buzzwords and brunch meetings. I thought it rested on not getting blacklisted by the Department of Defense. I used to think silence was survival. Keep your head down, do your job, and don't ruffle egos. But silence is only noble until someone mistakes it for absence. Then it becomes a weapon. Sharp, deliberate, patient. That Friday, I wasn't invited to the leadership offsite in Palm Springs. Mark flew the entire vision team out there on the company dime. I stayed back, holding the fort while they drank organic cucumber martinis and talked about rebranding the procurement funnel. And while they were clinking glasses, I met quietly with a federal liaison in a quiet corner of the city. Just coffee. Just two people clarifying the conditions of our active certifications, specifically the named officer of record for BidSync Alpha. It was still me. No one had filed anything to change that. Not legal, not Mark, not the consultants. No one even knew they had to. I smiled politely, paid for the coffee, and left. On my walk back to the office, I passed a billboard for some startup boasting disruption through transparency. I laughed. Out loud. Startups love that kind of thing. Disrupt everything, except their own illusions. They'd never survive an audit. By Monday, Mark would announce a strategic restructure. I'd already seen the meeting on the shared calendar. My name wasn't on the invite. Didn't matter. Clause 12.9 was. The first dashboard I lost access to was innocuous. Budget approvals. Nothing flashy. Just the back-end spreadsheet where project costs got tagged, shuffled, and timestamped. At first, I figured it was a permissions glitch. I'd been duct taping our system since 2016. But when the second dashboard vanished, contract lifecycle audit trails, I felt that twitch in my gut. The one that says, this isn't a mistake, this is a move. I didn't send a ticket. I didn't ask questions. I just logged the time and date, screenshot, archived. Next. By Wednesday, my name had been erased from the version history of 3 major compliance memos I'd authored. Gone. Replaced with team review. Which is funny, because the team in question had asked me, just 2 weeks earlier, how to spell adjudicate. I didn't get mad. I got methodical. Every scrubbed doc went into a secure folder. Metadata, backups, timestamps. I built my own quiet case file like a librarian preparing for a murder trial. Then the announcement dropped in our Monday stand-up like a turd in a punch bowl. BidSync Alpha is now under Mark's direct oversight, chirped the new project manager, a guy named Trevor, who still thought procurement meant getting coffee. Mark wasn't even in the room. He was off at a procurement leadership summit in Tampa, which probably meant 3 days of cigars, expensive steak, and pretending to know what an API is. The room clapped. I didn't. BidSync Alpha was mine. Not in a glory hog way. I don't do parades. I mean it in the sense that I wrote its compliance shell, line by line. I mapped its logic against federal bid structures, tied it to verified regulations, and hard-coded the triggers for clause checks. Most people saw it as a bid engine. What it actually was, under the hood, was a legal minefield. One wrong clause, one mistyped code, and it would self-disable. Like a missile with no GPS lock. And buried deep in its digital bones was Clause 12.9, the clause I drafted after a late-night call from a federal contact who warned me that subcontractor compliance rules were about to shift. I embedded it without fanfare. I added the verification protocol, keyed it to my digital ID, and buried the access path 3 layers deep behind obfuscated function names. Not to hide it, just to keep amateurs out. Which meant Mark's new oversight was basically ceremonial. He could look at the engine all day, he just couldn't drive it. I watched from the sidelines. I was no longer on the core review loop, no longer CC'd on legal requests. A few folks pinged me quietly, asking if I was okay. I replied with a thumbs-up emoji and logged every message. Not because I was scared, because I was already writing the ending. The thing about being underestimated is that people show their hands too early. Mark started pushing changes, updates to the interface, streamlining language, clarifying contract templates. But every tweak moved us further from compliance, not closer. He couldn't see the iceberg under the surface because he was too busy polishing the deck chairs. I let him. Hell, I handed him the champagne. Behind the scenes, I watched the logs. Who was accessing what, when? Mark's team opened documents, closed them, never read past the 3rd paragraph. I tracked system edits in silent mode, noting every trigger that was tripped. They thought they were cutting me out. I was embedding myself deeper. I also started printing things. Real paper. Old school. Not because I'm nostalgic, but because paper doesn't vanish when someone in HR clicks the wrong button. I labeled folders by project name, date, and level of Mark-induced stupidity. My filing cabinet became a war chest. At home, I backed up everything to a drive I named Plausible Deniability. I made copies. Then copies of those copies. I stored one at my sister's house. She doesn't even know what I do, thinks I fix spreadsheets for the government. But she's good at keeping secrets and worse at asking questions. The best part? Mark had no idea. He walked through the office like Caesar returning from Gaul, fist-bumping interns and planning a future where he was the face of modern federal bidding. He started floating his name for panels, told one director that BidSync Alpha was 95% his vision. 95%? Please. The man once asked if NDA meant no data allowed. I wasn't hurt. I was fascinated. This was a case study in arrogance, the kind that only exists in men who've never been told no by anyone who mattered. And it was going to bury him, because the algorithm didn't care about charisma. It cared about credentials. And the only one it listened to was me. They held the offsite at some overpriced vineyard outside Charlottesville. Leadership alignment and forward-thinking synergy, the invite said, in bold serif font like it was the Vatican of buzzwords. It was catered by some Michelin star chef flown in from Austin, because nothing says vision like truffle dust on deviled eggs. Mark sent out the invite company-wide, just loud enough for the people not invited to hear the echo. I wasn't invited. No shock there. Apparently, compliance isn't sexy enough for wine tastings and drone flyovers. They needed idea architects, not legacy roles, as Mark so delicately put it during a budget review last month. I smiled and nodded. And while they packed Patagonia duffels and posed for group selfies on the shuttle bus, I scheduled an appointment of my own, with someone a little less into buzzwords and a lot more into federal code, Darlene Voss, Senior Policy Lead at the Department of Federal Vendor Oversight. I showed up at the government building in slacks and flats, carrying a portfolio that looked boring enough to not raise eyebrows. The place smelled like old toner and bureaucracy, which is to say, I felt right at home. Darlene was already waiting, a no-nonsense woman with glasses that could slice through lies and a handshake that said, "I don't trust easily." We didn't exchange pleasantries. I slid her the file. She opened it. Clause 12.9 stared back in 12-point Times New Roman. I said, "I just want to confirm the current named officer on record for vendor cert ID 4MA129B7. She scanned the paper. "Still you," she said. "And if the named officer were removed without formal amendment and authorization?" Darlene didn't blink. Certification would lapse. All active bids would be flagged non-compliant. Pending contracts would stall. If delivered without resolution, that's a breach. I nodded. And if the system is changed, language altered, interface adjusted, without documentation signed by the officer of record? She looked up. Then it's considered tampered with. Chain of custody breaks. You'd be looking at an investigation, possibly criminal. No emotion, no dramatics, just facts. She closed the folder. "You're not the first to come in with this kind of preemptive clarity," she added. "But you are the first who already filed the original clause with our office. Smart." I smiled. "I like paper trails." She smirked, just a little. "Any plans to change roles?" "None I've been informed of." She tapped her pen against the file. "Then nothing changes unless you sign off. Anyone tells you otherwise, have them call me." I left with no threats made, no secrets spilled, just confirmation, and a quiet kind of power humming under my ribs. They were clinking wine glasses and giving toasts on the east lawn. I was walking through federal corridors, locking down my name in black ink. The thing about federal systems, unlike corporate ones, is that they don't run on charm. They run on forms, audits, and people who remember what clause was added to what certification, on what date, by whom. That's not Mark. That's me. Back at the office the next morning, the Slack channels were flooded with blurry photos of Mark giving some half-drunk vision talk in front of a vineyard barn. Comments rolled in. "Great weekend." "Feeling energized." "Team Alpha, let's do this." I scrolled, mute. My dashboard access hadn't been restored. My name was still missing from the weekly roundup, but none of that mattered, because while they were hashtagging leadership, I was quietly ensuring that the entire foundation of our largest client-facing system couldn't legally move an inch without me. The CEO had liked every off-site photo, left little clapping emojis, smiley faces. I didn't expect him to know what Clause 12.9 was, or how deeply it was embedded, but I knew he'd care if something went wrong, and eventually, something would go wrong. You can't replace the battery and expect the machine to keep running without checking if the whole damn engine's proprietary. I printed one more copy of my federal credential form, added a sticky note with today's date, and slid it into a folder labeled Insurance Real. Then I walked to the kitchenette, brewed the world's worst coffee, and sat down like nothing had happened. Let them sip wine. I'd rather sip facts. They always start with the whisper campaign. First it was, "She's a little rigid, don't you think?" Then it became, "She struggles with adaptability," as if working in a literal regulatory minefield for 15 years made me some sort of dinosaur. By week 3, the whispers turned into softly worded emails about team chemistry and collaborative bottlenecks. My favorite came from an HR generalist who once asked if ITAR was a type of fish. Mark didn't attack me directly. He's not built for confrontation. He's built for golf shirts and curated playlists. Instead, he let his hand-picked squad of half-baked strategists do the dirty work, guys with job titles like Innovation Streamline Partner, who carried iPads like they were sacred texts. They'd stop by my desk and ask questions they already knew the answers to, then act surprised when I gave actual information. They didn't want solutions. They wanted to say I was hard to work with. Mark fed it all through HR in drips. "We're just noticing some friction." She's been emotionally distant in meetings. Her communication style feels adversarial. Adversarial? I hadn't raised my voice since the Bush administration. But when a woman doesn't play the social game, silence becomes suspicious. Calm becomes threatening. And precision? God forbid. Then came the paper bomb. The PIP. Performance Improvement Plan. 3 pages of nothing dressed as concern. Vague milestones. Ill-defined metrics. Must improve interdepartmental engagement. Should seek peer validation through cross-functional feedback. I think they used ChatGPT to write it, and not even the good version. I read it once. No emotion, just a thin little smile. Then I signed it. No questions, no protest. Just ink on paper and a thank you nod to the HR rep who looked more uncomfortable than I did. They thought they won. That's the thing about men like Mark. They believe silence is surrender, but silence is a scalpel. And mine was already in motion. Back at my desk, I opened the internal document archive. Clause 12.9, my original, still sat quietly inside the policy matrix. But I wasn't arrogant enough to think they wouldn't try to tinker with it. So I preempted them. I drafted a revision. On paper, it looked like a simplification, a clearer version of the compliance criteria for third-party verification tied to active bid protocols. But buried in the revision was a new line. All automated bid outputs utilizing proprietary optimization must carry the compliance signature of the officer of record and verified authentication from the source credential key. In English, that meant the system wouldn't just need my title, it would need my token. A digital signature tied to a rotating encryption key stored offline, controlled only by me. Not IT, not legal. Me. I pushed the clause through under standard update protocols, because no one in Mark's camp actually read policy updates unless they were highlighted in neon and had the word urgent in the subject line. This one was titled Q3 Internal Compliance Streamlining, Clause Language Standardization. Translation, invisible. Once uploaded, it was live. And once it was live, they couldn't reverse it without triggering an audit trail that would show intentional interference with a certified compliance clause. Not even Mark was stupid enough to touch that. He just didn't know it existed yet. For the next 2 weeks, I was Exhibit A in their fake victory parade. They looped me out of planning sessions, left my desk off internal update chains. One of the interns was accidentally assigned to review a bid file I'd authored. When I flagged it as a breach of protocol, I got a reply from Trevor that said, "Let's not be territorial." Territorial? I was holding the damn walls up with one hand and rewiring the traps with the other. The CEO remained distant. He still liked every company update on LinkedIn and shared Mark's blog posts about navigating change. I wasn't angry at him. CEOs live in a different oxygen level. They don't breathe what the rest of us breathe until the air runs out. I could feel the temperature rising. HR thought I'd roll over. Mark thought I'd burn out. The consultants thought they'd cleaned up the mess, but none of them saw what was coming. Because the new Clause 12.9 wasn't a shield. It was a tripwire. And someone was about to step directly on it. The audit request came in on a Wednesday morning, time-stamped 7:42 a.m., buried in a thread titled, Follow-up, Contractual Clarity, RFQ 8029D. One of those bureaucratic subject lines that smells like trouble before you even open it. I wasn't on the email chain. Of course I wasn't. But Trevor, bless his bright-eyed ineptitude, forgot to strip the internal CC metadata when forwarding it to IT. So when the thread pinged a shared compliance log I still monitored, it landed in my lap like a gift-wrapped confession. The request came from Raymond Sims, a federal procurement officer with the personality of a stone and the memory of a grudge. Ray doesn't request audits unless something feels off. Apparently, something felt off. In his message, he listed 6 direct questions about BidSync Alpha's optimization logic, citing discrepancies between certified parameters and recent output behavior. Translation: the system was throwing results it wasn't legally allowed to. He asked for version history, signature trail, officer verification, clause alignment. And Mark? Oh, Mark responded. His reply started with, "Thanks so much, Ray. Always happy to provide transparency," which was the corporate equivalent of, "I am deeply, terrifyingly unprepared." He attached a 2-page PDF with language clearly yanked from a marketing deck. Phrases like streamlined compliance-adjacent frameworks and modernized protocol flows. I swear one slide had a graphic shaped like a fidget spinner. Ray responded 6 minutes later. No greeting. Just this. Please confirm current credential holder for Clause 12.9 and provide system log cert entries for the past 90 days. That's when the panic started. Trevor replied, CCing legal. Legal replied, CCing IT. IT replied with something dangerously close to, we're not sure who owns that credential. And in the middle of this slow-rolling disaster, someone finally remembered I existed. Not directly. No, that would have required admitting a mistake. But the next message included the CEO. I watched his name appear on the thread like thunder rolling into a clear sky. The reply came fast. Please advise why BidSync Alpha's compliance credential chain does not align with our current officer roster. Silence. Then, the email equivalent of a long, awkward cough. We're in the process of transitioning roles, Mark wrote. Our team is actively reviewing credential continuity and will provide clarification shortly. That word, continuity, is HR speak, for we forgot to read the fine print. Meanwhile, legal did their job. Quietly. Coldly. They dug into the digital vault, pulled the active clause 12.9, and realized that the credential key wasn't just a name on a form, it was a live, rotating encryption token bound to my federal clearance file. A token that had never been reassigned. A token that hadn't been entered into the system in over 3 weeks, because no one had access to it, because it lived in a device locked in my safe, and only I knew the password. The system had continued running on legacy credentials, until the auto-expiration hit, and when it did, BidSync Alpha entered passive mode. That meant every proposal generated since then was non-compliant, not fraudulent, just invalid. Silent failure. The best kind, really. No alarms, no red flags, just a line in a spreadsheet that no one noticed until the bids started falling through cracks shaped exactly like clause 12.9. I didn't intervene. I didn't forward the email or raise my hand like the ghost of Christmas oversight. I just sat at my desk, sipping cold coffee, watching the digital unraveling unfold in real time. One by one, the forward chains grew. Compliance officers, legal, internal audit, the CEO again, all trying to trace a credential trail that ended in a locked drawer and a woman they'd written out of the story. The CEO finally replied in bold, Mark, who currently holds credential control for BidSync Alpha. A full hour passed. Nothing. At 11:08 a.m., a separate message popped into my inbox from legal. Would you be available for a quick compliance clarification? I didn't answer. Not out of spite. Out of precision. Let them twist a little longer. Let the weight of ignored warnings and invisible labor settle onto their shoulders like the roof beam they never noticed was holding up the whole house. I scrolled through the thread one last time and filed it under a new folder. Proof of concept. Structural failure. BidSync Alpha wasn't broken. It was simply obeying its creator. The gala invitation came in with all the subtlety of a funeral wreath on my doorstep. You're cordially invited to the 14th Annual Defense Procurement Recognition Gala, it read, embossed and gleaming like a bribe. The kind of event where the wine flows like lies and every napkin costs more than a junior analyst's weekly salary. They sent it as a courtesy, which in Mark's world meant, here, come smile for photos before we cut you loose in front of donors. I held the envelope a moment longer than necessary, let the weight of it sit in my palm. Thin cardstock, but heavy with intent. 3 hours later, HR sent the follow-up email. Auto-generated, calendar blocked, labeled sterile as a coroner's tag. Transition meeting, Monday 9 a.m. Attendees, Elizabeth, required, HR manager, department VP. No subject line, no explanation, just a polite little shove toward the exit. They wanted to kill me off clean. Quiet. In pearls and lipstick. Toast me in front of procurement officers, then sweep the body before Monday's headlines. Mark, I had to hand it to him, had finally figured out how to stage a spectacle. He just miscast the lead. I didn't respond to the invite. I went shopping. Nothing dramatic, just a sleek black clutch and a new pair of heels that didn't squeak like betrayal with every step. While Mark's team rehearsed talking points and probably practiced how to look solemn but celebratory, I printed a single page and slid it into the lining of the clutch. Clause 12.9, the most recent, legally bound version. My signature at the bottom. Dated, sealed, active. I also included a copy of the federal certificate tied to BidSync Alpha's operating license, with my name, clear as dawn, stamped across the credentialing officer of record field. You can't edit those, not even with Mark's collection of consultants and Canva templates. That night, I dressed in silence. No nerves, no excitement. Just a kind of cold readiness that settles into your bones when you realize they've already buried you, so you might as well haunt the building on your way out. The gala was held in a downtown ballroom with ceilings too high for comfort and chandeliers that looked like frozen tears. Uniformed guards lined the entrance, a performative nod to national security, as if someone was going to smuggle state secrets in with the canapé trays. I arrived fashionably late, not for effect, just because I didn't need to mingle with people who once asked if compliance could be outsourced to AI. The place was packed. Contractors, lobbyists, defense liaisons, and the usual parade of people pretending not to recognize each other from last week's scandal. Mark was already working the room. Navy suit, perfect tie, hair freshly sculpted to appear windblown but rich. He didn't see me come in. I moved through the room like wallpaper, just one more ghost in heels. I found my seat at table 7, right next to the CEO. That, at least, was protocol. They had to honor the chain of command. Even ghosts get a final supper. He greeted me with a polite nod. No small talk, no questions. Maybe he knew something was off. Or maybe he was just waiting for dessert to cut the cord clean. Around us, the speeches started. Applause, forced laughter, standing ovations for innovation built on the back of invisible labor. I sipped sparkling water and waited. I didn't look for Mark. I knew where he was. Center table. Laughing too loudly. Flashing that teeth-baring grin he uses when he knows cameras are around. What none of them realized, what they couldn't realize, is that I wasn't just there to attend. I was the final act, the one holding the curtain rope and the scissors. By the time the first course was cleared, I could feel the shift. Across the room, Mark looked at his phone and smiled. He'd just hit send. Probably a pre-scheduled HR termination. Probably phrased with something sterile like, "We're going in a different direction," or "Your position has been transitioned." No fanfare, no confrontation. Just an ambush in high heels. I didn't touch my phone. Not yet. I adjusted the clutch on my lap, felt the paper inside it, and waited for the sting before the storm. The dessert was absurd. Something called deconstructed tiramisu, which really meant a plate of dust, mousse, and confusion. Around the room, forks clinked, conversations buzzed, and Mark stood across the ballroom, gesturing with a champagne flute like he was narrating the second coming. His laughter hit the air like perfume. Loud, synthetic, trying too hard. And then my phone buzzed. Once. Soft. Like a cough in church. I didn't flinch. Just slowly picked it up, screen angled against the low light of the ballroom. There it was. Subject, transition notice. Elizabeth, effective immediately. Your role has been retired due to organizational realignment. Please schedule a final handover with HR Monday at 9 a.m. All system access has been suspended. Thank you for your service. No signature. No name. Just HR. It was perfect. Cold. Empty. The kind of message designed by someone who didn't expect a reply. Just silence. I let the screen glow a few seconds longer. Then, without a word, I turned it to the CEO beside me. He was mid-bite. Fork raised halfway to his mouth. He looked at the phone, read it, and stopped. His brow didn't furrow. His expression didn't change. But the energy shifted, like oxygen leaving the room. He set the fork down, slowly. Napkin still folded in his lap. Just a man trying to stay composed while the edge of the world cracked under his chair. Across the ballroom, Mark caught his eye and gave a little toast from a distance. Smiled like the king of something that was already dead. The CEO didn't smile back. He gave the faintest nod. And that's when I saw him. Security. The head of the internal team. Stiff suit. Earpiece coiled like a secret. He stepped into the ballroom through the side door like he'd been waiting in the shadows the whole time. No rush. No theatrics. Just a signal received and a silent plan activated. I watched it all unfold without moving. Without breathing. A strange kind of stillness bloomed in my chest. Like being underwater in a pool no one knew you were sinking in. The room continued around me, oblivious. Wine poured. Silverware scraped. Laughter curled around corners. But at our table? Nothing moved. The CEO didn't speak. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't ask questions. He simply turned to me, voice low like he was reciting something sacred. Clause 12.9, he said. Is it active? I didn't smile. I didn't blink. It is, I said. Per policy matrix update, any automated bid output from BidSync Alpha must be verified and signed by the certified officer of record using the active credential key. That's still me. The words dropped into the silence like coins into a locked box. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Then he turned back toward the ballroom, eyes scanning for something, or someone. Mark was still grinning, still unaware. I lowered my phone, pressed the lock screen, let the darkness return. It wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was architecture. I'd built the system to obey rules, not people. And when those rules were broken, when they tried to erase me, the structure responded the way I designed it to, with silence, with failure, with undeniable, traceable, federal-level collapse. Security took another step forward, glancing discreetly toward our table. The CEO gave him the faintest signal, and I felt weightless, not vindicated, not angry, just still. The kind of still that comes right before thunder. They didn't make a scene. That's the part I'll always appreciate. One of the event coordinators, a woman in an emerald dress and a headset glued to her ear, gently approached Mark's table and bent down to whisper something. He looked confused at first, not threatened, just slightly annoyed. He wiped his mouth with his napkin, finished his sip of champagne, and stood up like someone about to accept another meaningless award. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as they queued up the final speaker. All eyes went to the stage. Except mine. Mine stayed on Mark. He followed the coordinator toward the side doors, still wearing that smug, crowd-ready smile. He probably thought it was the CEO asking for a private congratulations. Maybe a photo op. Maybe a press moment to cement his status as the new face of the firm's innovative edge. Then he saw who was waiting. 2 members of internal security. Not rent-a-cops. Not mall security in ill-fitting suits. These were the quiet ones, hired to be invisible until they weren't. Mark slowed his pace, one foot faltering slightly. The lead stepped forward, badge discreet but visible, and extended a hand, not to shake, but to motion. Mark froze. The grin slipped, but only a little. You could see the calculus happening behind his eyes. Public scene versus quiet compliance. Optics versus outcome. His hand twitched toward his phone, then dropped. He nodded stiffly. The CEO didn't rise from his seat, didn't even turn to look. He just raised one hand and gave the subtlest forward wave. Dismissal without drama. Mark didn't fight. He couldn't. Not in a room full of clients, press, and government officials whose budgets were worth more than his entire department. He let himself be guided out, posture still trying to appear dignified, like a man holding his breath at his own execution. Across the ballroom, murmurs stirred. A couple of reporters perked up. One lifted her phone. Somewhere near the bar, someone whispered, "Is that Mark?" Followed by, "Why security?" Followed by silence. The speaker at the podium continued as if nothing had happened. Something about public-private collaboration in emerging aerospace technology. A line that once would have made Mark beam with pride. Now it washed right over the room like static. Back at table 7, the CEO finally turned to me. The flickering candle between us made his expression hard to read. Tight-lipped, eyes narrowed, the polite mask he wore for fundraisers cracked just slightly at the corners. His voice was quiet, like the eye of a hurricane. "Is the clause active?" I didn't blink. "Yes," I said. Clause 12.9 renders all algorithm-based bids null unless signed by the certified officer of record. That's me. He stared for another beat. Not shocked, not furious, just absorbing the math. His jaw shifted once, a silent click. Then he looked back toward the ballroom, where guests were pretending not to look at the side door Mark had just exited through. And he exhaled. It wasn't relief. It was realization. Every bid, every contract, every federal proposal generated by BidSync Alpha in the last 31 days, null. Because Mark didn't just try to sideline me, he tried to run a federally regulated bidding system with no compliance officer, no credential, and no legal leg to stand on. The CEO reached for his glass, but didn't drink. Just held it, like a lifeline, and said nothing more. I could hear the air in the room change. Thicker now, the laughter subdued. Conversations dipped, people noticing the energy shift without quite understanding why. The press hadn't moved yet, but they would. They always do. A man escorted out by security in the middle of a procurement gala? That doesn't just vanish. I sat still. Perfect posture. Nothing theatrical. I didn't gloat, didn't smirk. My hands rested calmly on the tablecloth. The paper in my clutch hadn't moved. Clause 12.9, sealed and signed. My weapon was already fired. All that remained was the silence it left behind. Monday morning smelled like printer toner and corporate amnesia. The elevator ride was quiet. Just me and a junior associate who stared at the floor numbers like they might spell a prophecy. No one said anything. No one made eye contact. Not because they were rude, but because something had shifted in the gravitational pull of the office. You could feel it in the silence, in the way everyone's heels sounded sharper against the tile. My badge worked again. First time in weeks I didn't have to buzz security. I stepped into the compliance wing like I'd never left. My name was back on the glass, stenciled neatly in black. Elizabeth Warren, Compliance Officer. Not legacy role, not in transition, just back, as if it had never been erased. My inbox was full, but not overwhelming. The usual Monday churn, plus one flagged memo sent to all staff at 7:04 a.m. Subject: Strategic Compliance Protocols. Immediate update. Effective immediately, all strategic bids, system optimizations, and client-facing proposals must receive prior review and documented sign-off by Compliance Officer Elizabeth Warren. This is non-negotiable and applies to all departments. No apology. No context. Just the tone of a company trying to pretend the building hadn't nearly burned down last week. I opened the org chart. Mark's name was gone, replaced by a red placeholder square marked Interim TBD. Clicking deeper revealed a tiny footnote. Mark Gallagher. Status: transitioned, effective immediately. Voluntary. That's what they'd tell people. He'd transitioned. No mention of the gala. No mention of the escort. No mention of the system-wide audit request still glowing like a nuclear flare in legal's inbox. But in every hallway, people knew. They didn't say it. But they knew. Trevor didn't look up when I passed his cubicle. Just pretended to be fascinated by a spreadsheet he'd probably opened 5 seconds ago. The CEO hadn't scheduled a meeting. He didn't need to. The memo was the meeting. The hierarchy was restored. Quietly. Clinically. No speeches. No cake. Just the full weight of a system snapping back into alignment around the one part they'd tried to cut out. I sat at my desk. The chair still leaned slightly to the left, same as before. Same as me. From my bag, I pulled out the clutch, the one from the gala. Still sealed. Still untouched since Friday night. I unzipped it. Inside, one sheet of paper. Clause 12.9. Final revision. Language unchanged. My signature at the bottom. And just beneath mine, neat and exacting, like he'd signed it with gloves on, was the CEO's. Dated. Last week. Before the gala. Before the text. Before the final act even began, he'd signed off. He knew. Maybe not everything. Maybe not the full width of the trap, but enough to feel the tremor. Enough to cover himself. Enough to let the system do what it was built to do, protect itself. No fire, no speeches, just one clause. And one woman who refused to disappear. I slid the paper back inside, zipped the clutch, and placed it in the drawer. Then I opened my laptop and began reviewing contracts. Not because I had to, because now they had to wait for me.